Hello and welcome to the Xenothesis podcast. This episode 38, we are covering chapters 14 and 15 from Part 2 Phoenix of Book 2 Adulthood Rights of Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy. My name is Richard Acton and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host.
Hi everyone, Michael Glinka. How are you doing, Richard?
Pretty good. There's some interesting stuff in this chapter, I think.
Yeah.
Chapters.
The first chapter is a bit short, but the next one gives us a bit more... There's some interesting biology we've learned about the constructs and their abilities.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess maybe let's get to it, because we will start talking about that and then be like, oh, actually, we should talk about it a bit later.
Yep, let's stick to the approximate structure.
Yeah.
So your predictions.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with chapter 14 predictions. So I thought that the chapter will talk a bit more about the life of the three constructs together, Akin and the two girls. At least some of their experience in the life of in the village of Village Phoenix. But no, it doesn't happen. We're completely off track to a journey somewhere in the mountains. We don't know where.
And we do get a bit more of the construct, but not so much in Phoenix.
Absolutely,
being taken off to the, I think it was wherever it is that the salvage site is in the mountains. I think that's where they're moving them off to, which I suppose suggests the Phoenix people might have some indication that the Oankali are looking for them.
Potentially. And also we are introduced to a new psychopath in this chapter. I mean, I love it. Like, it's each time you just sense, like, the moment they introduce the named characters, I don't know, like Octavia Butler does this in a way that, like, you get an introduced character in a name, and then within the first, 5 minutes of the chapter when you read it, it's just like you either know they're gonna be like a either neutral character, an okay character, or a complete psychopath. There's no in between, like those levels.
I mean, she does do quite rapid characterization.
Absolutely.
Quite a lot of, you get a lot of relatively small indications, but they paint quite a clear picture.
Yes.
of
like,
the person.
You don't need much to know that something's gonna be wrong with this person. I guess let's get to the chapter summary.
Okay.
So the chapter starts with all the three kids being taken somewhere in the mountains the next day. We know they're traveling through some forests, but at that point we don't know where they're heading. Gabe carried Akin on top of a bundle of supplies, with Tate walking behind with even more supplies in her backpack. Amma was carried by Macy, Wilton, but we are not told anything about Shkacht at the moment. We just know she's definitely there. We're told a bit more about the biology of the girls, their throat tentacles, and the fact that Shkacht cannot actually see through her eyes, but she can see through her tentacles of her head. So that's a bit surprising, because we know that, like, before we were told about their noses, that, like, if they have the breathing orifice surrounded by the tentacles, like, then most likely their nose is not functional. But their eyes so far have been usually used, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, I think very much so. Yeah, and it doesn't make a sort of a great deal of physical sense to have, like, eyes. I mean, like the absence of eyes in general in the Oankali, I don't know I forget to what degree the adult Oankali mostly don't have, like, conventional ball type eyes, or if it's all kind of distributed in their tentacles.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, it doesn't make a great deal of physical sense to not have eyeballs that have, a lens and an ability to, move around and track stuff, because you cannot construct a focused image of the of stuff that you're looking at from, like, small pit eyes or small, even small, like, lensed eyes to some degree, like insects. There's a kind of there's limits to how much you can do with such a small lensing space, right? So there's very good reasons why eyes are the way they are, from, like, just from the physics of light perspective, and you see that in the evolutionary history of the evolution of eyes, right? It's a convergent feature, right? So multiple independent lineages have come to a very similar structure for the eye, completely separately from one another.
Although saying that, like from an engineer perspective, it's a bad design because the sensitive cells that that detect light are behind the nervous system, where the nerves are they're picking the signals from. So it should be all the way around, but it still works though.
Oh, actually, the octopus, I think, and other cephalopods as well, who independently evolve the eye, don't have that problem.
Oh, okay.
So they don't have the blind spot that we have, where we have like the nerve going through the middle of the retina. Yeah, that's another one of those interesting things about cephalopod vision, because they have very similar eyes to us in like structure. They have a lens and a photoreceptive bit at the back and so on. But yeah, like the history of the evolution of eyes always, it kind of follows a similar pattern, right? You have a light sensitive spot, and then you can kind of start to pull that down into a pit, so you get different shadings, so you can like perceive the direction. So if you recess the light sensitive dot a little bit, then the angle of incidence of the light into the pit, it tells you something about where that light's coming from and so on. So it starts to give you positional information, and then you can recess it further and move to like a pinhole eye, which kind of gives you some lensing effects and limited focusing ability. But then you can get a proper lens where you actually focus the image onto the light sensitive bit at the back, and you can see like all of these different stages of eye development in various extant organisms. And that same kind of pattern has repeated itself several times.
But yeah, actually, I was going to say that in fact, this is interesting because we know that, for example, in the book it doesn't say that there is no non-functional eyes, but well, so far. But like, because for example, Akin, when we first were introduced to Akin, Lilith told him to follow what people were saying because he can actually see with the light patches. With the sensitive cells on his skin, so he didn't have to look at people around because he could see them anyway. But I think it's the first time when we actually see a character with no functional eyes, as you described them.
Yeah, and we have kind of we don't know whether or not we have a true analogy to that in octopuses, because octopuses, they have a conventional eye, but they also have this kind of like the pigments that are present in their eyes are also present in their tentacles.
Yes.
And people have demonstrated they are in fact light sensitive in those tentacles.
Yes.
So they have the ability to perceive light levels in a distributed fashion across the surface of their body and their skin, which they use for their kind of adaptive camouflage stuff. Like if you've not seen, audience, like footage of octopuses doing adaptive camouflage, and also cuttlefish, like look it up. It's amazing. It's like mind-blowingly effective camouflage. And incredibly.
It's really amazing because they can really blend within seconds with the environment. And there are actually, in fact, some of videos that look into the individual sort of cells on a petri dish in magnification, so you can see the actual response to the of the cells to different environments, and it's pretty amazing how quickly they adapt to like the pigmentation.
They have like several layers. So I've just been reading this book, Other Minds. I've not quite finished it yet, which talks a lot about kind of octopus nervous system and how they perceive things and so on. But one of the things that they talk about is the structure of the skin for this adaptive camouflage thing that they do. They have kind of an outer protective layer, and then they have a layer of I think they're called chromatophores, where they can they have several pigments in kind of little muscular sacs that they can control, so they can alter the color of their outer skin by changing what proportion of these, the same way you would with like a red, green, blue pixel, but they don't have red, green, and blue. I think they have it's like yellow, brown, and I forget the third color, but they wouldn't have enough to make the full gamut of colors that they can make with those pigments. So they have another layer beneath the chromatophores, which is comprised of iridophores. So it's kind of semi-reflective, layered, iridescent structures where they can take in light from the environment and reflect it back, but with an altered wavelength, right? So the light that's coming in is being changed in these iridescent things and then projected back out. So they can make the green colors and stuff with this.
Isn't it? Did we have a conversation about the fact before about that the blue color doesn't exist in nature? Did we talk about this, or did I just watch a documentary about this and a video, and maybe just in my mind I thought we discussed this?
I don't recall explicitly. I may have also forgotten.
So, in fact, that this is very similar. So there's only one in butterflies. So we don't really have a blue color as such in nature. There's only a few examples of blue color in environment in nature. And for example, butterflies. There's only one species of butterfly that actually has blue color. Everything else is actually a fake blue. That is, they have special sort of arrangement of cells on their wings, so that they reflect the light in such a way that they actually it's not that they filter the blue light; they actually reflect the light so that it looks like blue.
Mm-hmm. So it's a bit of refracted slightly.
Yes, exactly. So it's like the iridescent layer you're talking about in octopuses. It's very similar in this way. But there's only one species of butterfly that actually has blue pigment in them. Every other butterfly is just reflecting the light in a way that looks blue. But in fact, it's like when you look at certain things and you see it's shining blue, right? But if you look at them from different angle, it loses that color.
Yeah, that kind of oil spill iridescence thing where you're actually just seeing the refracted light, not so much the is that just an animal thing? Because there are plenty of blue flowers.
I think I can be wrong in here because I don't really remember well, but I think there are blue pigments in nature in general, but I think most of them are fake. They're just a reflection of this particular physical property, property of the surface of those materials. But in general, I think there's only few things that really produce blue color as is.
Okay.
Actually, I think I may come back with this later because I think it's from a book that I saw, and then I looked into more videos about this. But I'll in the references I'll put in, if I remember correctly, I will check my sources on this.
Yes. But returning briefly to the octopus skin, so you've got your chromatophores, your iridophores, and then there's a third layer which is just sort of more generically reflective. It can do kind of white lights and so on. So yeah, that's the structure that lets them produce all these different colors, and it's almost like they have kind of a reflective backlight behind their screen, right? They have these reflective layers, so they can take the light in and shine it back out through the pigments and so on. But it's just this spectacular display that they can create. Plus, they also have a very kind of distributed nervous system, right? So a lot of the stuff that goes on in their limbs that do this kind of adaptive camouflage stuff is somewhat decentralized, and the processing related to it seems to be happening actually on the limb. In fact, you can take chunks of octopus skin, and they will still do the adaptive camouflage thing independently of the central octopus, as it were.
Can I ask you a question back on those layers of the different pigment layers? Do you know which layers evolved first? Which were obviously this is a collection of evolutionary traits. But I was just wondering what if there's any examples in nature that start with particular layer and then another one gets added to it over time as a positive trait that helps the survival of the animal.
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm not particularly deep into the evolutionary history of cephalopods, but yeah, that would be an interesting question to see how that.
Because then it feels like something has to be the beginning, and then something has to give a extra advantage over just a single layer of, let's say, just the color pigments to provide a better camouflage, right? So I'm just curious whether there's examples in nature that the more primitive versions of
Yeah,
cephalopods
I
that
don't
would
know.
have, like, for example, only 2 layers or only 1 layer. Something interesting. We'll look into it. Maybe
I'm not sure. Oh, it could well be that there aren't many extant examples left because they were all outcompeted by the better ones that followed them, and then it would be tricky to follow up in the fossil record because they don't have very many like hard parts to become fossilized. So it may not be straightforward to figure that one out, but maybe.
But then again, like deep sea creatures could have disadvantage, or like could show this examples where like the light doesn't reach as fast, so maybe there's a limited number of layers per like camouflage layers, and also I guess in some like pockets of Earth where like we haven't reached yet. There's trapped animals for like recently was like found a cave that's animals being trapped for like thousands of years and basically completely evolved in different directions, having no eyes whatsoever, and like feeding once every 10 years or something ridiculous like that. So there might be some examples out there. I'll have a look after the recording, see if I can find some examples and put them in the references.
But yeah, so it's an interesting mix of the fact that they have this distributed cognition in the like adaptive camouflage in their limbs, but they do also. I mean, it's not known yet whether or not they kind of have the perceptual input from that's used to do this adaptive camouflage stuff in their tentacles. Whether or not that information is like conveyed to their brain. They have kind of a small central nervous system because they have sort of so much of it spread throughout their bodies, but it seems that they can. It seems it at least goes the other way, right? They can exert some kind of volitional control over their camouflage action. So, for example, things like a cuttlefish, right? There's this in this book I was reading. There's this good account of the effectiveness of cuttlefish camouflage, where the guy who wrote the book was following a cuttlefish around, and it spotted him and then went and hid and pretended to be a rock. But he lost it briefly while it was while he was trying to follow it, and then he saw there's this thing with all these rocks, and I bet the cuttlefish is here pretending to be a rock, and he looked right at it and thought, no, that's just a rock, and then went looking somewhere else.
Wow.
And eventually came back and looked more closely. Like, okay, yeah, that is the cuttlefish. It just looks like a rock, despite the fact he'd looked at it before and thought, that's just a rock. It eventually came back and managed to find it again. Was like, yeah, okay, that is actually the cuttlefish. And then it kind of gave up, because it noticed it was looking at him, that he was looking at it. So it just turned off the camouflage. Was like, okay, you got me.
Waste of energy. This is no point of hide anymore, I guess.
Yeah.
And maybe because he wasn't it doesn't look like he was a predator, so maybe just like, okay, doesn't matter.
Yeah, and they're all a lot of the octopus and cuttlefish are quite curious about humans if they show up. I mean, some of them will just ignore you, but others, some will run away, and some will be like, they'll come up and probe you with a tentacle, see if you're interesting. But and there's a kind of a surprising amount of behavioral diversity in the octopus. So there's some really fun accounts of people trying to keep them in camp in tanks in labs to do experiments on them, because people they seem very intelligent and so on. So the early behaviorists were kind of interested in doing the same. Like, can we do reinforcement learning, get them to pull a lever to get a treat kind of thing. And they managed to do this with several octopus, but there were also there are numerous reports from various people who've worked with octopus of there being recalcitrant personalities among the octopuses. So there was one, I think it was called Charles by the experimenters, who instead of pulling he figured out that he could pull the lever to get a treat, but it was the stuff that you normally give octopus in captivity is not necessarily their optimal food. They like kind of catching live stuff and eating it. They're not all that enamored with just some shrimp or tuna or something.
Yep.
So it was a bit underwhelmed by the rewards he was getting from pulling the lever, so he just pulled it off the wall. And then he just yanked it off of the tank. Broke the experimental apparatus.
Wasn't there one? Wasn't there one that climb every so often. Scientists would come in because there were like two tanks, and there was one tank with the octopus, another one with like, I don't know, mussels or something.
Yep. They are well known for climbing out of their tanks, climbing into neighboring tanks, eating stuff from the neighboring tanks, and climbing back into their tanks. They seem to be very much aware of the fact that you can see them, and that they're being watched. So, like, if you have an octopus in a bucket, and you look at it, you know, it's like it looks, you know, perfectly content in the bucket, but you look away, and then it's like you look back, and it's walking away from you on the floor. Right? They're definitely they're super aware of the fact that people are watching them. They seem very much to be able to do that, because they definitely do this thing where, you know, they will do stuff when you're not looking because they know you're not looking. But yeah, I mean, the other thing this octopus Charles did was there was a light over his tank, which he didn't like, because, you know, they generally don't like bright lights. So he just sprayed water at it until it shorted, and they had to keep replacing the bulb. And he also did this to experimenters, right? So he'd hang around with his eyes sticking out the top of the water, and whenever someone walked past, he'd just squirt water at them.
What an asshole.
Yeah. So you just got this, you know, asshole octopus who refuses to take part in the experiments.
And then you're like, in this paper we're producing these results, we have no significant data because our test subject was an asshole. That would be such a good paper. Oh my god.
It's really funny to read, because there's a few quotes in this book from the paper where they're describing trying to work with this octopus. And the you know, it's like the kind of the typical, like, dry scientific description of this octopus just being a dick to the experiments. It's just, yeah, it's really quite hilarious. And there's accounts of them doing stuff like, you know, because they're fairly unimpressed with the food that they normally get in captivity. There was this one experimenter who, you know, she was like going down the line of octopus tanks, giving them a chunk of fish or whatever. And, you know, she went back to the one at the beginning, and it like locked eyes with her. And, like, very deliberately, whilst making eye contact, just like threw the piece of tuna that it was holding, because it kept it in a tentacle and like was like, yeah, see this, and then just like put it in the outflow pipe to throw it away. It's like the experiment with the capuchin monkeys where they give them the cucumber and the grape.
Yes.
Yeah, have you seen that one? There's a YouTube video. Look up that in if you want to see this. I think we've probably mentioned it before on the podcast, where like grapes are much preferable to capuchins than cucumber. So if you put two capuchins in a cage next to one another, and you get them to give you something as they're trained to hand you a rock to get a reward. If you pay one of them with cucumber and you pay the other one with grapes, then the one you give cucumber like throws the cucumber at you and is like, I want grapes. This is not fair. How come he's getting grapes and I'm getting cucumber? What's this? So they definitely seem to have this kind of
personalities in a way. Some sort of evolution of personalities.
Yeah, I mean, just from like interacting with them, people definitely get the impression that they, you know, there's some kind of like awareness there. Yeah.
No, absolutely, it's fantastic. I love listening to stories like that when you think one thing that's, you know, like animals and dumb and everything, but like when you actually get to observe, like, you know, any domestic animal, any animal like that, and you actually observe it, every one of them can have different type of personality. It's just fantastic, especially when you have an octopus that just throws a food while you're looking directly in your eyes. It's just it's being often like, the thing is, often animal studies with animals, especially rats, behavioral studies have this like problems, because rats are very sentient animals and are very aware of what they do, and they're aware of their environments and who they are. So often, like, you get those papers that they had to exclude certain animals from the studies because they were just not following what they were like trying to do, like just were completely refusing doing stuff or just doing the opposite just to piss you off. And just I just love it. It's just so good.
And it's kind of a thing that I think we don't necessarily accommodate well in animal studies, like individual level variation.
Absolutely.
Like, I mean, anyone who's ever owned a pet knows they have distinct personality, and it makes sense that you would have a certain amount of variation in behavioral repertoire in any animal that has a fairly complex behavioral repertoire. But yeah, we tend to flatten that a little bit in experimental work.
I think it's because also, I mean, that's the reason why we moved away from working on animals as such, because it just didn't make sense after some time when people actually realized, oh, animals aren't just dumb, they actually can have personalities and they actually can solve things. And perfect examples, like I think with crows, when like you're studying on crows' behavior and they're able to solve riddles and stuff like that. But like in general, that's why I think nowadays there's this massive jump what people who work with animals have to experience. So you usually start with mouse studies, where you obviously can breed mouse very quickly and you can get certain gene mutations, and usually mice don't have that much personalities because they're too small, their brains aren't that developed. But then you move to rats in some studies, and the behavioral changes can affect the study. But then you don't really have, like, for example, at least in UK, you don't really have many animal like cat or dog studies. You usually go to bigger animals, and those studies usually are not really behavioral studies, but more of like bones and joint studies and stuff like, or like sort of to mimic more human well, let's say cure conditions,
like physiology.
Yes, physiology. That's correct. That's a good word to use here. But in overall, like, you don't get that many studies. Usually, you just jump straight to human trials, basically. So there's a bit of a gap in there. But I think you can sort of see that, like, it's, I would say, less ideal when you do an experiment and the animal just refuses to participate because fuck you.
Yep. But yeah, we kind of got a little bit sidetracked.
Yes,
there.
quite a lot. Half an hour in the recording, and we haven't even passed the first sentence of the.
Oh dear. Okay, right. So the point was that octopus may or may not be able to see the light coming into their tentacles. So it may or may not be analogous to the Oankali, but it seems at least somewhat possible that they can in fact get some sort of distributed impression of the incident light on their tentacles, and that's something that's accessible to them centrally, as it were, in their central brain.
But yeah. Let's get back to the chapter.
Yes.
So we finish with the fact that Shkak cannot actually see through her eyes, but she can see through her tentacles on her head. We've discussed this. Let's move on. So,
yes,
Akin realized that they are being taken somewhere, but only stopping once at noon. But it seemed like the humans were fearing that they might be in pursuit. The fact that the guns taken from Akin's captors, original captors, were also taken by the men in the group, indicated that something was happening and something was going on. At night, the humans erected tents for sleep. Akin was sleeping with Abira, an Israeli woman who had 3 kids before war. In the book, she was described by quite tough, but when she was dealing with Akin, she was like very gentle. So, mother instincts kicking in. Amma and Shkak slept together because no human wanted to sleep with them because of their tentacles. As everyone was falling asleep, Akin overheard Nessie. Did we say Neki? Nessie? Nika? What?
I think it was. Well, I went with Neki.
Neki, okay.
I don't know
Sorry.
what the actual correct. Yeah.
Neki Roybal, as I call her, the local psychopath, and her husband Stancio, talking about removal of tentacles of the girls. Akin avoided them because he wanted to avoid Neki, but Neki had a way of saying a thing and saying a thing over and over until other people began to say it and believe it. Quote from the book. While Neki was trying to persuade her husband that the girls wouldn't remember anything when they grew up after they removed the tentacles, forgetting the fact that everyone knows that all the constructs remember everything. Understandably, her husband tells her that she's a psychopath. And here's a quote of the book. "How many times, Neki," the man said finally, "how many times would you torture children? Would you torture them if they had come from your body? Will you torture them now because they did not?" Generally, like the fact that I get that some things like happen, like when some societies in nowadays even do certain things like what's the word, removing the it's the religious removal of, like, for example, foreskin. Circumcision, for example, when they're
Right,
they're kids, because the trauma, they will not remember it, but it's still fucking barbaric. And like there's this lady who wants to remove their tentacles, even though and they will not remember it, even though clearly everybody knows that constructs and the Oankali can remember everything because they have this eidetic memory. It's just it just blows my mind how I mean, they're desperate, I understand, but this is borderline psychopath. Not borderline, that is psychopath.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily specific. The psychopathic personality has very specific diagnostic criteria, right? This is not entirely. I mean, it's not precisely consistent with that.
Well,
right?
but still, to be if you want to be pedantic about it, but realistically,
yes.
If anybody was like, "Oh, we're just gonna cut them,"
Come
and
on,
keep
Michael,
cutting
me,
them,
I'm always pedantic.
Yeah, of course, I know. But if you would want to go cut the tentacles over and over again to cause the pain, the child, so that she just looks the way you want her to look, that's just
yeah. This is I think it reminded me quite a lot of the there was kind of a habit in or a way of doing medical treatment, particularly for intersex individuals, which was kind of conforming surgery to make their genitalia resemble either a male or female,
right.
Body type, because there's kind of this concept that the gender identity would match the physical body, which is somewhat debunked as a theory, right? If you take someone's body and make it look a particular way, it won't necessarily their gender identity won't necessarily come to match that. But and this was done quite a lot to kind of try and the emphasis was on that, on making the body conform to the societally expected version of a particular gender type or a particular sex, right, physically. But the insufficient attention was paid to the risks of these surgical procedures and the actual functionality of the organs, right? So if you go in there and do a reduction in size of an oversized clitoris or whatever, then you can seriously impact the functional aspect of that with respect to nervous perception and so on. Okay, you've made it look more female typical, but have you actually compromised its function? So this, it feels like a very kind of analogous situation here, right? They want them to conform and look like what you would expect a human to look like, but they have very little interest in the risks of what the surgical procedure might be, because there's no anesthetic here, and that you can easily get infections. And analogously in the intersex surgery situation, where there's anesthetic, but
there's no functionality.
Operative risk is not there's always risk when you're doing an operation, and infections, post-op infections, and nerve damage and all that stuff. That's the thing, right? So So I'd recently read Alice Drager's book, Galileo's Middle Finger, which was why this analogy hit me.
We mentioned it last time, didn't we?
Yeah, that book came up in the past, but I think it's an interesting parallel. But this, I think that's why they're trying to do it, right? They want to make these girls who have these weird tentacles look human, so they can be accepted in human society the way we want to make. We previously had wanted to make intersex people look normal so they could be accepted by society, but this is not giving consideration to the biological function and to the possibility of just accepting a little bit of difference.
No, it's basically borderline torture at this point, what this woman is thinking, and the fact that she's so determined to do it is, for me, is just the desperation has grew to something even more sinister.
I don't think it's even borderline. This is cutting off the tentacles is straight up torture.
Yeah.
Now, so returning briefly to that octopus thing we discussed earlier.
Go on.
There's I can't remember if I mentioned My Octopus Teacher.
No.
I think I just talked about the book. But there's this great documentary film called My Octopus Teacher about a guy who kind of makes friends with an octopus. And there's a section where one of the octopus loses a tentacle in this. It's like bitten off by something. And like the octopus is clearly quite affected by this, right? It looks physically hurt, and it goes off and kind of huddles up in its den and kind of nurses its injury for a bit, and they do actually grow back their tentacles. But yeah, I mean, another analogy to some other media struck me there with this like image of the octopus losing its tentacle and the cutting the tentacle off these girls. It's like these things are clearly like highly innovated, like perceptual,
absolutely,
and like tactile. It's like some of the most sensitive parts of the body. So like cutting them off is just,
it's like gouging your eye, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're introduced to a new favorite character of mine. So yeah, I'm looking forward to her doing something really stupid.
Yeah. So not anticipating great things from Neki. Yeah. On the characterization of her, there's this interesting. They talk about how she just keeps talking about it. Like she'll just persist. Like she's constantly like trying to. She once she's fixated on an idea, she won't give up, which I think is an interesting bit of characterization. It's quite effective.
Yeah, like I mean, if say like the more she repeats it, everybody starts like, oh, maybe the tentacles doesn't look good, like blah blah and stuff. All of that like suddenly just becomes a common.
It feels like an archetype of the sort of person that I've encountered, right? Someone who just won't let go of the idea and keeps saying it until everyone else falls into line.
Yeah. How do you say it? Who said it that when you repeat a lie enough times it becomes the truth? Like it's a very similar concept here. It's just you keep repeating it until it becomes the common knowledge, I would say, or common opinion in this case. Sorry, but yeah, the chapter ends with Neki crying a bit before sleep and Akin finally drifting off to the wonderland of dreams, and that's where the chapter ends. So it was a short chapters, but our discussion wasn't. So. You're welcome, everyone.
Okay then. Yeah, so it's just not a huge amount happening there. Just we get some introduction to some new characters, set up some potential drama with Neki's interest in the girl's tentacles, and the context of the fact that they're moving to the
salvage site,
this kind of safe place, and they're going there armed. Yeah.
So that's it. They must be aware that something might be happening. We don't know how much time. Well, wait, we do know it because it was the next day. They went to salvage site, so maybe they realized that having 3 kids constructs is a significantly increased risk of the Oankali trying to take them away. So, but yeah, I guess let's go to my chapter 15 prediction.
Yeah, sure.
So the next day, Neki is going to try to convince more people. She's not going to give up of the idea to cutting the girl's tentacles, and I think I thought that maybe Akin will try to do something to prevent that. I suspecting. To be fair, I wasn't certain what may happen because time with Octavia Butler's books predicting what's going to happen next is near impossible. But if they're on a journey, I thought maybe they will sort of reach the salvage site, and on the salvage site, Akin will try to talk to Tate, because most likely Tate, I think he trusts her. That talk about like she's trying to do this, it's stupid and it's gonna cause massive pain and also may kill her, something along those lines, But wasn't certain about this. Time can pass quickly or can be very slow before an idea of one monster comes to fruition. So who knows?
Yeah. Yes, I think you got the part about Akin speaking to Tate about this correct, but yeah, we didn't get to the salvage site.
No, not yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's start the chapter 5, I guess.
Sure.
So the days went by as the group were climbing through the forest and the hills. The hills. It was getting cooler, so the humans were trying to dress up the kids, but Akin and the girls were fighting them off to stop that. Their bodies could adjust quickly to the temperature changes, and also it was uncomfortable for them. We know that Akin was really uncomfortable wearing the clothes because it was covering his sensitive parts, and it was he didn't like it. So. Just imagine like the kids like, no, leave me alone. Just trying to come on, put this hoodie on. On the second,
no, I mean, well, human kids do that sometimes.
all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, on the second night of the journey, Akin began sleeping with the girls. They needed to learn English quickly, and he was trying to protect them. Neki the psychopath was doing what Akin predicted, talking to people over and over about removing tentacles off the girls' heads. And even though people were laughing behind her back, some started to say the same. Akin talked to the girls about trying to stop the humans from cutting them, and Shkak asked him if there's any human who could trust, and he says, Tate could. He doesn't understand what is wrong with her, but I quote in the book, I don't either really, but it's the way they have to live. They want kids, so they buy us, but we still aren't their kids. They want to have kids. Sometimes they hate us because they can't, and sometimes they hate us because we're part of the Oankali, and the Oankali are the ones who won't let them have kids.
Yeah. So yeah, they have a lot of difficulty understanding the way that humans think.
Yes. They treat them as their kids, but at the same time they're not, because there's something alien in them, basically. But yeah, when one of the girls points out that they could have dozen kids if they only joined Oankali, Akin explains to them that he thinks it's about the fact that there won't be any more of the humans if they did that. The girls refute that. They're saying that they're also part of them. But Akin says, I quote of the book, if they could perceive, they would be us, but they can't and they aren't. We're the best of what they are and the best of what Oankali are, but because of us, they won't exist anymore. One of the girls points out that the same will happen to the Dinso and the Toht Oankali. Akin says there will be always the Akjai that do not trade in case something goes wrong. So the humans should also have that a human Akjai, even though humans are flawed and over specialized, despite the present conflict in the genes of despite the presence of the conflict and the genes of hierarchy and intelligence, which is a reference to the book 1. That they're talking about, like, I think it was Chitaya that was talking about this. But yeah, that's what we've been talking about, like, having the possibility for humans.
Yeah. This is the interesting, an interesting prospect, right? And it's kind of odd in some ways that this hasn't been raised before. I think so. We've got the Dinso and the Toat, like, groups of the Oankali that mix with the humans, and then this Akjai group that goes away without doing any trade. Yeah. And it makes perfect sense that the other trade partner, if it's actually a partner in some meaningful sense, would have the same option for an insurance policy, as it were, in that trade. The same Akjai outgroup, as it were. But we've not heard if this was a thing in previous trade partners, right? Did other species with whom the Oankali trade have an Akjai?
Well, actually, Richard, because in the first book it said that the humans are the first so developed organism, like societal wise and intelligence wise, to what they've traded so far. So I would assume that they've traded to what we would call equivalent of animals, that might have some intelligence developed, but not enough to be aware to be creating societies as such.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, we never really delved too deeply into how many of the past trade partners were kind of full sentience, as it were, and how many were something else.
It's just I remember vividly that in the first book it said that, I think it was Chitaya who said to Lilith that, like, this is particular, the humans are the first ones to be like this intelligent to participate in the trade, with participate in trade being quotation marks.
Yeah, I think perhaps I should go back and check it. I remember them saying that they are among the most intelligent, but I can't remember intelligent species that they've traded with before. But I can't remember whether or not there was any indication of like whether or not there were some like only marginally less intelligent ones, but I don't know. It's an interesting kind of gap in our knowledge of the history of the Oankali.
But I mean, it makes sense. That's this whole idea, and I think Akin is right. There should be the human Akjai version, where in case anything goes wrong, like it's a partner, right? It has to be an equivalent sort of level of trade exchange, yeah. Whereas in here we have basically full assimilation, and the Oankali are keeping themselves just in case something goes wrong. It's just like, yeah, but what about the humans? Like, you're just gonna wipe out the whole humanity off, and just what next? But yeah.
It seems that Akin is very having had this idea, he's very certain of it, right? He is like, oh yeah, we should have a human Akjai. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not he can convince the other Oankali of that.
It'll be interesting. I guess it's still a process of learning for them. And if we go to the book in here, this is at this point the girls broke the contact with Akin and remade it, and after realizing something, that Akin was left here to understand the humans, right? So since he was not being heard, and they allowed him to study the humans. So this is idea, like the girls that realize that, like, oh, it's been a while since he's been here, but there's a reason why maybe he's been here, because one, he looks the most human, and he's more likely to learn about the humans in depth that, for example, the Oankali are not capable of, and that's the reason why he's there. And in going back to book 1, when Nikanj, or was it Kaguya, said that you will never understand us, but your children will, right? That's the whole idea, maybe, like that the construct understand what the Oankali are, and they understand what humans are, and maybe because of the human part, they will be able fully understand why humans need that separation, that part of group, the resistance, that the Akjai, as Akin calls it.
Yeah. The sort of human Oankali hybrid serve as a bridge of understanding between the two species that helps to kind of span that gap that exists currently.
Absolutely. But the question was, what about the girls? They are in danger, but Akin is going to talk to Tate. Otherwise, they'll have to run away, basically. In case they can hide in the river, they can hide in the river. And although Amma cannot breathe underwater, Shkak can, and can help her with linking with her. This made Akin think of his own sibling and the solitude he felt. And this is interesting, that the fact that like they are capable of like linking themselves, like it's
this one is another thing that I was kind of curious about in this chapter, because like so far we've seen them do this kind of nervous system type link, right? They can send electrical impulses to one another's like nerves, or some chemical exchange, but the exchange of oxygen is kind of a whole like other level of interconnect, right?
Because you have to
if you're going to do that efficiently,
especially if they have closed circulatory system, then there has to be a way for them to manipulate it to be open and be able to connect it with the other being.
Yeah, I mean, you either have to have some really efficient gas exchange process to like move the oxygen from your blood into the other blood, which would mean like the same kind of interface you have in a lung, where you've got like an oxygen tension gradient and lots of small capillaries to move the gas from one place to another, which requires a lot of surface area, which doesn't sound like they have. Or you need to like directly hook up your blood to their blood.
Yeah, it's because I mean, with the oxygen exchange, like there's the reason why lungs and like have such a thin layer of cells immediately. With capillaries behind them to be able to absorb the oxygen, because anything more than few micrometers is already too much for a proper oxygen delivery. And in fact, you can see that like if you cut your finger in a way and there's not enough like oxygen going in, like it gets like, or internally you damage yourself, like the tissue goes necrotic very quickly. So there has to be some way of them being able to connect, or potentially, Richard, it could be that if one of them can breathe underwater, potentially she could exhale the pure oxygen that she inhaled through, let's say, gills, if so called, and provide them directly to the breathing orifice through, in a way, let's say, a kiss of life, in a way, if I would call it.
Okay, yeah. So you'd have kind of like some kind of reverse. I don't know.
Like absorbing oxygen from the water in form of gills, and then being able to exhale it in a way, without the exhaling of the carbon dioxide, the waste product of metabolism.
You'd have to be able to reverse the action of the lung effectively, right? You'd have to be able to make it release oxygen from the surface of the lung and then exhale it. Yeah. I don't know how. That would be tricky chemically,
yeah.
I think.
I mean, you'd have to. I mean, the only easiest way to do it would be have separate organs like gills to absorb water, and then have another set of organs that basically shut off for non-functional, and then like two pairs of lungs in a way that like one is for inhaling oxygen, exhaling carbon dioxide, but in the case of anything, you can do the reverse. But that sounds very energetically wasteful, right?
And like the reverse operation of releasing oxygen is, I think, I don't. I mean, you'd need a process that could produce the pure oxygen.
When you have hemoglobin or hemoglobin absorbing the oxygen, right? There has to be a molecule that has to take the place of it, right? So, in a way, I mean, if she can concentrate the carbon dioxide level in her lungs and then cause it to forcefully exchange it with the oxygen and the hemoglobin molecules in the blood, then technically you could be able to push it off. But it's very, I would say, it sounds very, I don't know, the method of the exchange it'd be very difficult, I would say, for the body to be able to to manipulate the body to do that.
Yeah. I think the like the direct circulatory connection would almost be easier.
Yeah, I feel like to be able to manipulate cells to open the system, like, but at the same time, like, imagine like you can, I don't know, but at the same time, like, like when Akjai was giving birth, and then she was able to create an orifice anywhere on her body to Ahjas, yeah, right? She was able to give orifice to give birth to a baby, right? So potentially the Oankali are capable of doing that, and basically, with a bit of time, let's say, maybe they can hold breath longer than humans, and just being able to like create a connection, some lung to lung connection.
I mean, it would be useful to be able to do things like just give someone else a transfusion without needing any equipment.
Yeah. I feel like I have the suspicion that maybe they're capable of, like, there has to be second organ to be able to do that. Yeah, I don't know. It sounds complicated to come up with like just to force your body to have an open circuit to your blood circulatory system. But then if you cut yourself, I don't know. It sounds weird.
Yeah. But then, you could just have like a valve in the same way you have like a heart valve, right? Although, a bit less like leaky.
But then again, there is a lizard that can, or chameleon that can shoot blood out of its eyes, right? So technically you could have some sort of system that does this thing in a large enough volume that it doesn't kill you in the first place, but it's enough to to give enough oxygenated blood to the system, right?
Well, I mean, I suppose in this context, it would have to be two-way exchange, right? You just kind of connect up the circulatory system in both parts, so you can take under-oxygenated blood from the person you're trying to oxygenate and oxygenate their blood and keep the overall system volume the same.
I feel like one heart would have to be pumping just pure focus on pumping the oxygenated blood, where the other heart focusing on pumping the deoxygenated blood.
I don't think necessarily. You just connect the like arterial blood to the vein, because you've already got the two loop circulatory system in each half, right? So you just take the an output from the arterial system, put it in the like Venus system on the other one, and then the other way around in the. Yeah, I think you can wire the plumbing up, so it makes sense.
But still, it's quite an interesting system that they are capable of doing this.
We've kind of done this. It's like surgically before. People have taken mice and rats and so on, and opened up the circulatory system of both and like connected them.
I remember doing that
so
for like diabetic mice experiments, particularly, for example, where they did this to show that the insulin effect, I think it was first insulin to prove that there's something in the blood that's capable of helping the diabetic mice.
Yeah, I think that was one of the early, like parabiosis, I think is what they call it, experiments where you connect the circulatory system of one animal to another. But they've also used it quite a lot in like aging research. So if you take an old mouse and you connect it to a young mouse, then the young mouse appears to age more rapidly, and the old mouse appears to be rejuvenated somewhat. So there are factors in the blood that are affecting the aging processes. But yeah, I mean, they are kind of I've never actually seen one in person, but I imagine this would be a pretty freaky thing to look at, right? You've basically got it's kind of this like mouse centipede type deal.
When you put it that way, that sounds really bad. It really isn't that way, though. It really isn't. At least I hope it wasn't. I don't think anybody does experiments like this anyway nowadays. No.
I think there have been parabiosis experiments relatively recently. Yeah, but I mean, they anesthetize them when they do it, and they stitch them together, and they're selected so they're not going to have like rejection issues, compatible biotypes and so on. But yeah, you do end up with like two mice that are just like stitched together down their side in the middle.
Modern Dr. Frankenstein, basically.
It's pretty weird. Yep. But yeah, so. Once again, in an interesting little sidetrack, but Scat needed to breathe underwater or something like that. Let's get back to the story.
So yeah, we end up with like the idea of like idea of linking one to another made Akin think about his own sibling and the solitude he felt. Akin tells them that he doesn't believe that he was left by his family. He believes that his mother would come alone if he needed to be. But the girls told him that they saw some men, resistor men, and bringing a woman in the arms and neck tied with rope, saying she belonged to them. They feared that the same would happen to Lilith if she tried to go by herself. But Akin tells them that although they would have to try hard to do the same to his mother, many reasons why they would have to work hard on this. But the conversation ended here because the girls placed him in between them, and before he realized that it's too late, the girls were soothing him with their own deliberate calm and putting him to sleep.
Mm-hmm. There's a little sort of diversion into doing some characterization of Lilith and her relationship with Akin here, where just kind of a little bit of appreciation for Lilith's character, where a couple of sort of quotes from the book here, and Akin's kind of thinking, that they're not going to deliberately have left him here. Let's see. So I don't believe they're leaving me with the humans deliberately, he said. My parents wouldn't do that. My human mother would come alone if no one would come with her. And then in response to the kind of reaction from how the resistor women were treated, that Scott and Amma provided to him, that if they were alone, they were kind of taken as property. And then Akin's just like, no one could do that to my mother. She wouldn't let them. She travels alone whenever she wants to. And they Amma and Scott are like, you have 3 Oankali parents. Wouldn't they let her go alone? Like they wouldn't let her go alone. If they couldn't stop her, then they would go with her, right? And Akin's like, yes, but very uncertain. It's like this would involve someone stopping Lilith from doing something that she's intent on doing. That does not seem likely.
Yeah.
And then Amma and Scott, they don't know Lilith, is what Akin's thinking, is that they don't know how she became frightening sometimes, that everyone stayed away from her and that she vanished for a while.
Every so often, yeah.
So you get the impression that like even the Oankali are somewhat intimidated by Lilith.
To be fair, I would also be intimidated by a person who you made a scapegoat of to betray basically your whole race. So yeah, I would say plus you gave her super strength. So Yeah.
Yeah. It's and I like the fact here that Akin's just like his impression of his mother is just like this kind of unstoppable force. Yeah, which it's kind of great.
When you're on Lilith, you start to hear the boss music. But yeah, let's go back to the chapter. So the next day, Akin went to speak to Tate and explain to her that whatever she's planning, whatever Neki is planning, it will cause Shkak to die because she cannot breathe properly with the tentacles, whereas Anna would be seriously crippled. The pain would be immense, and Tate asks him like if the girls were unconscious, would it still hurt? But Akin tells that there's no matter what, even the girls are dead, the tentacles on them are not, and if anyone tries to harm them, they could still kill them with the poisonous sting, the response, a response to harm. He didn't want to tell Tate this before because he didn't want to scare her, but Tate tells him that it's good sometimes to be scared. And she's going to tell people about it through a story about when Gabe and her were on ship and she saw a man injured one of the Oankali body tentacles. He tells Akin that his mother was there with them, but won't mention her when she tells the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting that we get this information that the tentacles kind of have a little bit of a mind of their own here as well. Yep. It's kind of analogous to octopus tentacles, right? They have their own sort of semi-autonomous nervous system. So even if the girls are dead and the tentacles are not quite completely out of juice yet, they'll reflexively sting you if you try and attack them. It's an interesting little detail.
I guess it's
and we get
I guess it's also a fact that an Uloi potentially could help to revive a body in case like there's still enough damage caused to it. You potentially, if it's not, it's like there's still chance for it to survive if there's no present, right? So it would make sense to be still.
But I mean, like even with normal Earth animals, as it were, instead of aliens, right? I mean, if like for a little while after their like circulation stops, there's still
enough oxygen and
reflexes and stuff while there's still enough like ATP and stuff in their tissues to do stuff. So I think it's kind of just in that sort of space of there's still some residual chemical energy sat there that can be triggered to do reflexive action even after the main body would be judged as dead. And the other interesting little thing in this, I think, is the return to the kind of thematic point that we touched on in the last chapter of like storytelling in human culture. Because, Tate is saying that she's going to tell this story about what happened when someone damaged the body tentacle to try and discourage Neki from attempting to cut the tentacles of the girls and scare them off that course of action. But yeah, it's kind of taking this sort of indirect approach to trying to dissuade her, right? It's telling this kind of illustrative parable of what happened in another circumstance, and letting Neki generalize the lesson from that story to this one, and sort of this almost like kind of incept the idea, right? Don't like hit them over the head with it, but let them come to it on their own by providing them with some information to analogize to.
I guess, and sometimes it just makes like if a person comes to a conclusion by themselves, then it leaves a longer impact on them and preserves the memory longer, I would say.
Yeah, this kind of like thinking in narratives thing that we are fairly good at as a species.
Continuing the story, Akin goes quiet when he heard about his mother, and when Tate asks what's wrong, he tells her again that she should have taken him back. He tells her about Shkak told him of the resistor villages that tie woman up. Tate apologizes, but she can't take him back home because he means too much for her people. Akin tells her again that the Oankali won't allow them to keep him much longer. Even if Amma and Shkak grew up with him in the village, they would still need a construct Uloi to have children. Even though he's a child and yet to understand what it means, but he knows that he needs a 3-being family unit to properly reproduce.
And he's kind of like acutely aware of the fact that he's separated from his sister, who would be the other part of that reproductive unit. Yeah. And I think we get another moment of kind of like vulnerability and childlikeness from McKean in this scene, right? Because it's more of this like juxtaposition of him kind of like breaking down and crying about the fact that he's, you know, separate from the family, and that Tate is, you know, the resistors are keeping him apart from them, but also still, you know, like very intelligently discussing and talking about the situation.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah, we kind of maintain the impression that he's still very young because of all of the still childlike things that he does.
After a brief pause, Tate tells him that they need to go back, but Akin prompts again if she will help him. She tells him no, because him and the girls mean hope for them. When Akin tells them that it is futile to think that, Tate warns him is not to say that to the humans. Tate tells him that she's aware that his people will come for him, but until then they need that hope. In the final part of the conversation, Akin tells her about her lack of understanding what he's losing. He's born with his sibling and he knows she doesn't care, so why should he care about how her people? And it's the fact that like that this delusion of like, yeah, we are aware that you're gonna be taken away, but we still want you to have it like this illusion of children or family.
Yeah, that's this kind of. I think we've discussed it before quite a lot about the kind of the like hypocrisy or the inconsistency of the way that the humans are kind of thinking about this whole situation. You know, they want to keep the humans, like the human line, alive, but they're trying to do so with like hybrid construct children, and you know, they have this whole kind of mentality around the resistors trying to maintain some kind of a hope for doing otherwise, but they're just sort of not like confronting the reality of the situation. They have this disconnect between their kind of hopes and their actions. And there's an interesting little thing that Tate says about being kind of bad at self-delusion, right? And it seems that she is, you know, she's aware of this, right? She knows that this whole project of the resistors is not going to work, but for some reason she's still kind of participating in this, but like she's not under any illusions that it will work. It's got a little. I have a little bit of difficulty kind of understanding some of her motivation, because it seems like maybe I think it might just be because like she's not particularly interested in pursuing the kind of like, you know, the whole kidnapping the children and trying to maintain the human line bit, but it's just more interested in not engaging with the Oankali, and she doesn't really have kind of an alternative that sits, you know, a third alternative of like the kind of delusional resistors and the people who are you know, kind of capitulating and going along with the Oankali. Like there's not like a third group, right? There's not a straightforward way of just being not affiliated with either of those positions, right? And yeah, so if she wants to be, you know, somewhere where it's okay to live, like Phoenix and with Gabe and so on, then she has to kind of put up the front, even if she knows it won't work.
Yes.
There's an excellent section in a book I read recently by Julia Galef called the Scout Mindset, and the third part of that book is titled Thriving Without Illusions, and it talks about the kind of more honest handling of reality and mistakes without relying on kind of this like model of retroactive self-justification and self-deception or on like blaming errors on others, for kind of the like benefits of emotional resilience, right? I mean, if you can
take the blame,
imagine that you didn't do something wrong, then you can, you know, imagine that you know, you're fine, as it were. But for the most part, it's actually useful to have the reality of that feedback, and there's a pretty good case to be made against a lot of the kind of like positive thinking, positive illusions, maintaining this kind of attitude, because like it means that it's difficult to make progress, right?
Yeah.
You can't identify areas where you've had errors.
You don't really grow with that, do you? Like if you don't take the responsibility of some of your actions or the illusions you create, eventually like you basically live in a world of illusions and nothing really, you never move forward.
Yeah. So you have to be kind of like well anchored to the reality of the situation, so that you can, you know, both be aware of when you have erred and how you can improve. It's just the kind of you can there are tools for effectively managing being emotionally resilient to like getting negative feedback from the environment and still maintaining, you know, a positive attitude and so on. But you don't need to be self-deceptive in order to attain those goals. So I think that's you know, if we find ourselves in a situation like Tate, where we're having to like try and pretend one thing, although actually I suppose it's not really Tate that's mostly guilty of this, because she is aware of what's going on, but kind of consciously choosing
not to think about it,
to maintain this illusion. But like the situation of the other resistors, where they're kind of trying to maintain this unrealistic image, and like then as a result failing to update and act reasonably in response to the reality that they're facing.
Yep. Yeah, it's the fact that she still goes along with it. It shows that all those people are basically, I don't know, on the very last string of hope, I would say. But I think a further push and they just all crumble down like a house made of cards, like basically. But yeah, let's finish off the chapter, I guess. The chapter ends with Tate saying she understands that he should hate them, but he's all they have. At that moment, Gabe comes in and asks what's going on, and Tate tells him that they have work to do. And when Gabe asks what work, Tate says, and quote, "We have to see to it that our girls aren't forced to kill anyone." And so where the chapter ends. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, there's a little bit before where I think Tate basically says that she would potentially just like give Neki a knife and invite her to try if the girls were a little bit older and more able to defend themselves.
Yeah.
Which and I think it's the same kind of that's almost what she's intending to do at this point, right? Now that Akin's kind of said that, you know, trying to do this is probably not going to end well for someone who tries to do this, because they'll defend themselves reflexively. But yeah, it's interesting that like I think Tate's kind of facing the reality of that situation, right? So I may not be able to dissuade her from doing this, but
give the tools to protect for the girls to protect themselves in a way. Yeah. God, I just some people.
Yep.
Anyway, I guess let's go to my chapter 16 prediction. So I think that obviously Neki is going to definitely trying to do something, and eventually either the girls will try to escape or they'll escape them. Because we don't know whether like they'll the next few days whether they will reach the salvage site or not. But nonetheless, I feel like Tate will talk to people, and some people are like, yeah, actually, if we try to do something, it might be like the tentacles can like harm us. But so her plan will be postponed, and then she'll try to do something the salvage side, because we don't know whether there's some people the salvage side or not. But definitely, the girls will want to escape that fate that's awaiting them if they're gonna stay longer.
Okay. Yes, I had a question from earlier. I was going to ask you. Do you think the Oankali are actually intentionally leaving Akin with the humans? And if so, like, does Lilith know about this, or are they actually struggling to find?
So I am not certain, because in one way we had Tino being left for to death, right? So I suspect that if he survived this whole situation, he might be somewhere on the ship, maybe in those like in those stasis chambers where he's being healed. In the same time, just before they left, Arjas gave birth. So I suspect maybe like in a way they are aware where Akin might be. There are some Oankali that were tracking them, but at the same time it was an opportunity, like the girl said, that for Akin to learn about the humans and help the Oankali to understand that there's a necessity for humans to have this choice of having the third human Akjai version of them. So I feel that at the moment maybe they're not actively pursuing them, but there's like other Oankali that are on the looking for him, or at least they know where he is, and they're just keeping distance, because maybe this is as long as the girl said, no, he's not harmed. He is he's learning about the humans.
Okay, yeah. So maybe his immediate family are kind of busy with Tino's injury and how she's giving birth and so on. So they're a little bit distracted by that, and the other Oankali that might be pursuing him are a bit more disinterested personally, and therefore holding back a little bit because they see it as an opportunity.
Like often Oankali did when seeing an opportunity to learn something out of it. So it feels to me like that might be the possibility here.
Okay.
It makes sense though, because if you have they've been talking about human Oankali construct that would be able to finally bridge the Oankali and the humans, right? So if they come to the conclusion, or if they're journeying with the humans and they come to the conclusion that then maybe the Oankali will finally listen because they're capable of,
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, 'cause the Oankali sometimes seem quite risk averse, but other times they seem like quite willing to take substantial risks with the lives of some of their. It's an interesting kind of mix, but it would seem a bit harsh to just dump this 18-month-old child in with a bunch of fairly dangerous humans.
I honestly believe that Lilith, right? As Akin said, if there's no stopping Lilith, she would be like a tank walking through the planet if she had to, and there would be anything stopping her if there was nothing else that was pulling her behind, that that was more urgent. Although your child being stolen is very urgent, but something maybe like Nikanj telling her that they have everything under control, and it's a great opportunity for Akin to learn. And there's still some things they have to take care of before they go and collect him.
Yeah, so the Oankali are sort of playing interference with Lilith to stop her from immediately pulling him out.
The only
maybe,
being to stop, being able to stop Lilith is Nikanj, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Because I honestly feel like she would fucking run there and then wouldn't stop until she reaches the village and then beat the hell out of everyone. Even the guns wouldn't stop her. So.
I mean, she's usually very measured, though, right? That's one of the things that makes her so intimidating is that she knows when to wait.
I mean, yes, but at the same time, I would love to see Lilith going on rampage. That would be such a, especially on Gabe, going on his face, just
that's certainly tempting.
To this day, I still feel like Kaguya deserves a punch in the face. Even although he is the father of, an Oloi parent of Nikanj, still deserves a punch in the face for being an arrogant ass.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I definitely think Lilith felt the same way.
I guess on this very positive note, we should finish here. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. We were Xenothesis. You can find every place we upload our podcast on our website, xenothesis.com. I was Michael Glinka.
I was Richard Acton. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.